Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Maiden.
But what's more impressive to me about the
Chase Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta get
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase. Get him, Chase.
And Adam.
No, not necessarily, but it's the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Go to the running backs because we got a lot to talk about. And we have our first showdown that we want to get to in this one. Okay, so the showdown here is over Isaiah Pacheco. Chris and I have him ranked in two different tiers. Greg's going to judge our debates and see which one he agrees with more and where he falls on the Pacheco value of it all, too. I have him at 16. Chris has him at 8. So a mid-level RB2 to a mid-level RB1. So, Chris, why are you so confident in Pacheco cracking that top 8 this year?
First, I'm trying to figure out why you hate one of your own Rutgers players, Dan. I mean, there's very few of them in the NFL, so give them some props. But I think Isaiah Pacheco is one of those last cutoff guys when you get to the actual bell cow back opportunities. There's a lot of different guys who talk about being a bell cow back, but he actually has the opportunity to be that guy. CHE is the only guy kind of there right now on the roster. They have a bunch of undrafted free agents backing him up. No McKinnon. And we saw without McKinnon, it was only a 4-game stretch, but he had over 100 yards and 20 touches per game. He's a guy who's been highly efficient in the passing attack. It was very efficient last year as well. So the increased opportunities didn't necessarily decrease his efficiency in the passing attack. And you saw a guy who had 9 total touchdowns. And a Chiefs offense that we all thought really struggled. We all talked about Patrick Mahomes and he struggles. This offense is going to be much more opportunistic in scoring and opportunistic with that of having guys not being 8 or 9 men in the box. You're going to have respect for Marquise Brown on the outside and Xavier Worthy on the outside and Travis Kelce and Rice and name all different other guys in the passing attack. And then forgot about Pacheco coming out of the backfield, forgot about Pacheco getting the draws, forgot about Pacheco getting opportunity to get 15, 20 touches and just have soft fronts to run against. So I think all those things add up to a guy that can be an RB1 option for you. I think RB14 last year in half-point PPR. So I think we're going to see an increase from that. And I think that you're going to see a guy that, barring injury, now injury is a tough thing because his running style kind of bars itself to that. But a guy who should go over 1,000 yards, continue to be involved in the passing attack, and one of the most potent offenses in football.
Yeah, there's a couple key points in your argument that I'm going to pretty much highlight as to why I am not as big on him, why I think he is more of a mid-level RB2 here. You laid it out. The offense last year was not as good, but it was also more run-dependent than we've seen the Chiefs' offense be in recent history, and he still could only be the RB15 on a points per game. Excuse me, to get the frog out of my throat here. On top of it, you have a guy that, so while he was more featured than he would have been, and Jerick McKinnon was out of the picture, not producing top 12 numbers, from week 9 on, he was very good, Chris. McKinnon misses a few games, 69% of the team carries, 11% target share. But the one thing that was interesting to me during that stretch, in particular between weeks 13 through 18, while Clyde Edwards-Helaire seemingly had been left out for dead, he started to work his way into that third down role during that last quarter part of the season. In fact, gaining to the point where he was getting an 11% target share as well, the same as Pacheco. His 17-game pace would have been 51 targets over that little stretch. Signaling
as that close to the playoffs.
Hold on, signaling potentially that they could potentially be open to the idea that Clyde Edwards-Helaire works in on passing downs, which is what I had profiled him to be coming out of college to begin with. I wouldn't be that surprised if Andy Reid decided, you know what, we'll give him a shot to kind of play a little bit of that McKinnon role as we got to see in the last quarter part of the season. And he also had the 7th most red zone touches. Here's what's interesting about that. The Chiefs have always been a pass-heavy red zone team, right? You got Patrick Mahomes, you want the ball in his hands and the most money part of the field. Last year was a huge increase where they ran the ball 42% of their red zone attempts inside of 10, where previous years they had been 38% or less in rushing. If we have all these weapons and we think Patrick Mahomes is going to have this big resurgence to being the Patrick Mahomes of old, I don't see Pacheco getting the same amount of opportunities in the red zone that he was just based off of that. I think, but to your point, as far as a workhorse role, I think he's got a great, strong RB2 floor. But I do not see a player who has a special potential, a special talent to be a top 12 player. He had every opportunity last year and still couldn't do it. Go ahead, give your rebuttal real quick.
Was Kareem Hunt bad for this Chiefs offense when he was healthy and playing for the
Kareem
Chiefs?
Hunt was a more elite player than Pacheco was. And actually, the most important, thank you for saying that, because the most important thing that just reminded me that you said it too. Pacheco's rushing style has already led to back and shoulder issues. That does need to factor in when you're ranking a guy who's not going to change his running style and is going to be his third year in his league. I don't know if he can hold up playing the way that he does. While it's fun to watch, I don't know if he can hold up that long. Go ahead, Greg. Judge who you want in this debate and where you fall on Pacheco's stat line.
All right. So Pacheco, in my heart, I want Chris to be right, because he's my RB2 in Scott Fish. Okay, but taking that aside, I have to judge his spirit. So I look at Pacheco, and I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not really a huge drain on his touches. I see Pacheco as a third-year emerging running back who is going to get better, learn the game better. And that said, I think the two of you have kissed your sisters. Now, I don't know if you have sisters or not, but I graded it as a tie. You both made excellent points. It could go either way, and I hate ties, but I don't think either one of you won the argument. So I'm going to defer. Adam, I know you're not grading this, and I know you have your own feelings on Pacheco, but you heard their arguments now. Do you think that they were that disparate, or do you think that it was a tie in the argument case?
I think it was, I think both arguments were pretty strong. And look, I'm more or less right in the middle between you two as well. So you're going to have to look elsewhere for a real answer, because I have him ranked right there at 14, knocking on the door of 13. I could go either way there. So.
I just say CHE didn't steal his job in the playoffs. So Dan can give that stretch all he wants from week 13 to week 18. The Chiefs were resting themselves to the playoffs. It's also a Chiefs team that lost on Christmas Day. So I wouldn't necessarily judge what they were doing there, but I would look at the playoff stretch, and I saw Pacheco as being the man in the backfield.
Yeah,
I think the offense is going to be better. But again, you have the injury. I think that third year is an emerging year for a lot of players in the NFL. And I do think that if he plays a whole season, Chris probably has a little bit of an edge, but I don't know that he will play a whole season because of his running style. And in that case, Dan could be right. If he goes out and misses 5 or 6 games, Dan's going to be right. But if he plays the whole season, I'm not sure he makes 8 anyway, because there are going to be running backs that are going to be elevated in scoring, at least in Scott Fish, because of the new kickoff rules. The new kickoff rules are going to impact regular leagues too, because your starting field position is going to be better than it has been in the past. The fact that the kicking team cannot leave the 35 until the ball is in the hands of the receiver or hits the ground gives the returning team a 15 to 20-yard head start. There's no way they don't have better field positions to start drives this year.
Greg, I'm glad you made that point about it. And I don't want to get too much of a tangent here because we still have a lot to cover. But with the new kickoff rules, there are people like you're talking about the Scott Fish Bowl in particular because of the scoring in there. But just in general, it's a new rule. It's going to, and people are going to be curious about heading into the NFL this season. And I just want to throw this out there. Starting running backs are still not going to be involved in kickoffs. Let's be real. Coaches do not want to put extra wear and tear on their starting running backs, even in these situations. So when people are asking me about return games and these elite running backs as Chris McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley or, going to be returning kicks, emphatically no. But what I am glad that you brought up within that was the idea that the field position could be a lot better, which may lead to being more favorable for coaches to want to run the football, especially early downs. So I do like that aspect aspect of it. Just wanted to point that out. Let's get into Zamir White. Zamir White. I don't even know where that came from. Zamir White here. And this is a guy who's kind of interesting to me, right? Because I could make an argument based on what we got to see in the 4 games that he started that maybe this guy has a lot more potential than what we're necessarily willing to give him credit for. I mean, Adam, Chris, and I all have him either as a back-end RB2, high-end RB3. We're all pretty much kind of in the same range. On the flip side, we only saw it for 4 games. It's a small sample size. This wasn't a guy coming in with screaming high draft capital and not a offense that necessarily makes you feel uber confident in what it's going to be able to put up this season either. So, Greg, when you look at Zamir White, what are your expectations?
I expect him to be high-end RB2. Everything depends on scoring system. It really does. I don't expect him to be a 60 reception running back. But if he can get 30 to 40 receptions, which I think is possible, I do think that he can edge up in that 12 to 14 range because he is the bell cow. And I think the coaching staff saw enough that they didn't really push to keep Josh Jacobs, who is a superb running back. So I like Zamir White because you can draft him so late and still get a guy. Remember, Najee Harris was a top 3 running back his rookie or second year based on volume. Zamir White is going to get volume, but everything depends on your scoring system. Half-point PPR, half PPR, I think he's going to be very good. And in no PPR, I think he's going to be even better.
Yeah, I mean, he's going as RB23 right now in ADP. Adam, what are you seeing as Zamir White? What are you thinking?
I'm really torn on Zamir White because I agree. You look at those games and actually the efficiency numbers within those games, not just like yards per carry, but like yards after contact, his elusiveness, all these things actually, I mean, small sample size, sure, but in the same offense, he far outperformed Josh Jacobs in those categories. He was definitely doing more after contact. He was definitely more explosive. Like, there's no doubt about it. So, on one hand, I'm like, I think you can be a genuinely good running back, and I didn't dislike Zamir White. I believe in the class that he came out. It was towards the back end, but he was in my top 5, and I did like Zamir White. And there's some things that he does do pretty well at an NFL level. Problem is, I just really hate having running backs who are on bad offenses, and I have a problem with this offense just kind of on the whole. I mean, I talked about something earlier why I think it could be Gardner with Getsy. That doesn't mean I like Getsy, right? I just think he has a tendency to do those things. I don't think he's a good offensive coordinator. I like that the Raiders seem to be a team with good chemistry, and maybe that can work out. But looking at this offense on paper, it's hard to be optimistic about really anyone outside of Javonte Adams for me. And that's the guy who I'm like, all right, volume will probably prevail and it'll be fine. But everyone else, I just have a really hard time. So I do have him just barely outside of my RB2. I do think he's worth a gamble at that range because I think the upside is there. I think he's a talented player. I do think he'll get volume. I actually, kind of to your point, Greg, I think that he'll be sneaky on third downs because I actually think he could compete with Amir Abdullah as far as a pass blocker specifically. If they plan to throw to the running back, I think it'll be between Laube or Abdullah. Let's not get it twisted. But I think he could find himself on the field on third downs just as a pure pass blocker. I think he did do a fairly good job at that at Georgia. At least I graded him much better in that category than Laube at the very least. We'll see what happens with Abdullah. But nonetheless, he's an interesting guy. I think he is right around an RB2 for me in the low end, but I think he's worth a gamble.
Yeah, it's just the tier that he's kind of falling in, right? Like he's again ADP RB23. James Conner's right behind him according to ADP. Raheem Mostert's still down at 27. Tony Pollard, we've talked about on this show. We kind of like him. He's He's at 29. So there's just other guys I feel like have more potential in their game than Zamir White does, and it makes it kind of hard to value him anymore. But his volume should give him a floor of an RB2. Let's talk about another guy who I'm torn on, because I wasn't torn on him initially, but all of the hoopla coming out of the Denver Broncos camp has me questioning, okay, well, exactly what is this role supposed to be? And I'm not even 100% sure now. And that's Javonte Williams. I look at Javonte Williams, I look at that backfield. There's no doubt in my mind who the best running back in that backfield is. It's Javonte, especially on a 3-down skill set. I don't think that's a question. McLaughlin, he can, be a little compliment, be a little spark plug. That's fine. It's not a guy who's going to get more than 10 touches in a Sean Payton offense in any given game. Aldrick Estime, I don't think that was a pick to made for this year, and I still have a lot of questions about what he can even be from an NFL standpoint. They're talking about a guy who ran a 4.7 and only knows how to run straight, has no wiggle in his game whatsoever between the tackles. I'm not really big on an Aldrick Estime, and Samaje Perine. We know what Samaje Perine is. He's there to block on third down. Like that's it, plain and simple. So I think it's definitely Javonte Williams. So I have him ranked at 26, which is the highest of this panel as of now. But there's a lot of talk about Javonte. Maybe the team is soured on him. I don't know, Greg. How are you reading this situation?
I've heard he may not even get out of camp. He may be cut. Now, whether that's true or not, the thing we have to remember is he had a 3 ligament tear 2 years ago. Okay. You don't come back from that first year. That's why I'm not high on Brooks in Carolina. Brooks is going to be fine in Dynasty. I don't want him this year because in a redraft, I think you don't come back that first year from a 3 ligament tear. It's a tough
Greg,
thing.
Just to be clear, Jonathan Brooks had an ACL injury that was more in line with Breece Hall, not Javonte Williams. It was a clean ACL tear. It was not a multi-ligament tear. Just to make sure we have that information out there.
But my point is that you don't get confidence. The injury heals in 9 months. Talk to Jesse Morris, fantasy doctors. He's a surgeon. He's an orthopedic specialist. I talked to this guy. He says he doesn't think Chubb will play this year. If he does, it'll be late in the year. I feel the same way. So I'm looking at Javonte Williams. Either he's done or he should be back to what he was. If he's back to what he was, you guys are all way too low on him. But with rumors that he won't make it out of camp, I'm drafting Jaleel McLaughlin. You don't think he'll get more than 10 carries? I think he may have to because he's the most dynamic back in that backfield last year in terms of efficiency. So it's not a backfield I want a lot of. But if I'm looking for that RB5 on my roster, I'm not afraid to take him.
Yeah, here's the thing with Jaleel McLaughlin. I mean, we're talking about a guy who really only had 2 games where he was relevant at all, and it gets really kind of overhyped. And he didn't have a 100-yard rushing game at all the entire season. He only had 2 games where he was over 50 yards rushing. The only reason he even wound up on our fantasy radar at all because he had 2 games where he had 2 touchdowns in those games. Outside of that, he did absolutely nothing. Like there's a perception about Jaleel McLaughlin. I think it's over portrayed here quite a bit, and he's not.
His analytics was good though. You got to give him that. His analytics numbers were good.
Yeah, it was good, but also let's look at it again. 10 touches. I think the most he had was 12 touches in a single game. We know how Sean Payton operates. That ain't the type of guy he's running out there most of the time. If anything, if Javonte Williams does get cut, then I would say probably Aldrick Estime is getting the nod on early downs. That's just how he rolls and how he's done it since forever. Even with the Alvin Kamara days, he still had Mark Ingram to take on the early down role, and Alvin Kamara was a special talent. I just don't buy into it. I don't think Javonte's going to wind up getting cut, but there's a lot of smoke. Sometimes there's fire. Chris, go ahead and give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a rotational thing. I think this is going to go back to the heyday of Sean Payton when he had Deuce McAllister. After Deuce McAllister's injury, and they're rotating different backs. They had Pierre Thomas, they had Darren Sproles, they had Mike Bell. So they're rotating 4 guys deep, and I think you're going to see the same thing again this year. You saw similar things at receiver. I think Sean Payton's back to I'm going to create my offense in a sense. He's going to put different guys out there, different packages, different personnel groupings, and keep mixing it up. So I think it's going to be hard to kind of find that RB1. Now, Javonte has upside there because I'm with Greg on this, that the second year after your injury is usually when you get back in your explosiveness. And what I have had heard outside of camp things, when Javonte was on the field and practicing, they did see the explosiveness returning. So that's the key thing. I think that, if you're getting a guy that has explosiveness and you hear good things coming out of camp, then you have a guy that you probably can value as a RB3, RB4 option. Otherwise, he's a guy that you're kind of just sitting there, and if he's left in, late rounds, why not take a shot on him? Because he's somebody who could wind up being something, just depending on, other guys get hurt too. P. Ryan's had injury history. Estamine has an injury history. So these guys all have injury histories as well. So it can be, Javonte could be a guy that doesn't really cost you anything, but could be a good guy to have on your team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you laid it out. That's why I'm the highest ranked on this board right now at 26, looking to move him higher, because when he's a year removed from the injury, Javonte Williams was an explosive running back. If he's getting an explosion back, I believe in the talent that he is. To your point, though, also ADP RB30, 96 overall. There's no reason not to take a shot on him, because after you get out of that tier, you're not really getting a whole lot of running backs who have a ton of upside anyway with the touches they might have. Let's dive in, though, real quickly to the Chargers backfield. So, Greg, help me out here. You're a Michigan guy. You get Jim Harbaugh. He's over on the Chargers. They get Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, who, of course, know the Greg Roman system. And then you have, day 3 pick Kamani Vidal, who might mix in. A lot of fantasy people are, excited about him because of the potential of really just the unknown. That's what it is. We know what Gus Edwards is. We know J.K. Dobbins can't stay healthy. Vidal's just the unknown, and that's why people get excited about him. So how are you reading this backfield right now?
I'm drafting Vidal almost everywhere I'm drafting, and I'm drafting him because I get him late. He's my RB6, so I can cut him if I need to. Gus Edwards is 29, okay? 29-30 is generally the cutoff for running backs. Now, I know that Raheem Mostert's 33, and he had a pretty good year last year, but it's rare. It's very rare for a running back to last that long. And Gus Edwards never had more than 200 carries in the season. So Gus Edwards is not a bell cow. I don't think he's ever had 1,000 yards, maybe once, but I don't think he's had 1,000. 3 years in a row. And how many running backs in the history of the NFL have come back from a torn Achilles? I'm not talking about the ACL. I'm worried about the Achilles. There have been a couple that have come back, but none of them have ever regained the explosiveness they had before they tore the Achilles. I think Cam Akers was the last guy that came back from an Achilles tear and had a reasonably decent year, but it wasn't a spectacular year. So what do we know about Kamani Vidal? We know he's a small school guy. We know he's compact, like 5'9" and 215. That's a good build. That's a sturdy build. We know that he's hard to tackle, but he's not real elusive. He's just hard to bring down. So he's a Jim Harbaugh type back. I mean, if you look at Jim Harbaugh, who did he like the last 2 years? Hassan Haskins, who was very hard to tackle, and Blake Corum, who is a 5'9", 205-pound guy that is very strong and hard to tackle. I think Kamani Vidal gets the starting job, if not week 1, by week 3. And I think that he's going to be the bell cow back in that system. So I love him, especially at value.
We'll have to see. He's still a 6th-round pick who's very questionable in pass protection, and so is Gus Edwards. And that's what makes this whole thing murky, in my opinion. Gus Edwards isn't going to give you anything in the passing game. We know that. He doesn't even play on third downs because he's been a terrible pass protector his entire career. Vidal has those similar questions as a 6th-round rookie coming out of Troy. J.K. Dobbins would be the quote-unquote best pass catcher, but again, coming off an Achilles injury, I don't know what we're even kind of J.K. Dobbins we're going to see. So this whole backfield, in my opinion, is a complete mess, which, to your point, I think makes Vidal the more intriguing fantasy guy because you can draft him ADP RB49. So again, if you take him, you can easily cut him. It's not like he's killing your team, and everything else is such in flux that maybe he finds a pathway. I don't think it's going to be as soon as you'd say, unless there's an injury, but at some point in the second half of the season, it could be right there.